Hey everyone, it's Dr. Trish and Mr. Gary Ramsey
Hello.
here with you for part 4 of our video series, Healing Cancer, Freedom from Fear. And just as a little recap for those of you who may not have seen the earlier parts, and we hope you will take a peek at them if you haven't.
Yes.
Part 1, Gary talked about his life before cancer and how his cancer diagnosis, which left him with the notion that he could die at any minute, literally transformed his life. Right?
Correct.
And it transformed his life to one of, I would say, fearlessness.
Yes? Absolutely.
Yeah. A life free of fear. And he tells all of that in part 1, how that came to be. Part 2, Gary explains what happened from the moment he left that doctor's office and that diagnosis that he could die at any minute, and how it was really fearlessness that led him on his path to healing. Yeah. And then part 3, he describes in a lot of detail that path to healing.
Yes.
Most of which occurred at a remarkable clinic in Mexico.
Correct.
And here we are now for part 4.
Part 4.
And part 4 is finding freedom from fear. We hope to leave you with tools, techniques, practices, and inspiration for finding freedom from any fear you may be having in your life.
Yes.
Yeah? Okay, so take it away, Gary.
Well, as we discussed in the other 3 episodes, upon my return, I began to see everything in life even more differently than during my whole, whatever we want to call it, illness, my whole journey. But I saw the uselessness of any fear. And as I mentioned in the last episode, sometimes I would have episodes of fear, but upon my return, more and more I started to see that fear is really, there's that acronym they use, false evidence appearing real, that it truly is about a projection of ourselves, leaving the presence of the moment, and then going out of ourselves and projecting something in a non-existent future, or projecting something from a past that has already occurred. And that therein lies really the problem that we have throughout the world, that we are constantly falling into those two things, or ideas that we have about ourselves or others, or about places or people, things. It doesn't really matter what it is. And that by the time I got back, that was gone. That was just gone. I had been getting rid of it all throughout my journey, and it was the fearlessness that really led me to my journey and then completed the journey. I think, even as I mentioned, that I went to the same doctor that did the diagnosis for all of my follow-up sessions, everything that I needed, all testings, everything, 3-month, 6-month, 9-month, year, etc. And nothing. Everything was actually perfect. And I began to accept that things going well is really a possibility for anybody if we can let go of, number one, our what do I want to call it? Our preconceptions of what we think should occur, or our ideas about how we need things to be or to go. In other words, embracing and accepting in total what is occurring in the moment.
And for you, that included embracing the possibility of dying.
Correct. That, again, I think we get caught up in the fact that of how it negatives and positives, which, again, even on my journey, I realized that dying was really not a negative. It's not a negative at all. Everybody's got to do it at some point. I think what would have been more negative for me was not doing it in a way that would be good for me. And I think that's true of everything, how one heals, how one lives, that we're experiencing, we get so many opportunities to embrace all kinds of things throughout our life. But some of us tend to ignore those things or put them off or just kind of don't want to deal with them. And that then when crisis hits, well, we have nothing to help us out because we've been putting it off. It's the famous Scarlett O'Hara, I'll think about that tomorrow, that we put it off. And then when we are faced with something, we're totally behind the eight ball.
So we were talking about this part 4 a lot before we started taping this part 4. Talking a lot, because there was a lot of content that we thought we wanted to share with you. So I'm just going to kind of piggyback a little bit on that conversation and just say that what you just talked about, people kind of not being in touch with what's going on and then all of a sudden a crisis occurring. We both agree that really had to do with not being able to be present, right? Not being able to be present with what is, not being able to really be stepping back from what we're experiencing in our minds, in our emotions, in our lives, and bear witness to it. So is it not this idea of just being present that is the key to fearlessness?
It's the total key to fearlessness. And it is the only thing that we have control over, whether we choose to be present or not to be present with whatever it is that's occurring. And that is the greatest power that anyone has, and it's truly the key thing that helped me through the entire journey from start to finish.
So you were present with everything that came up for you in this process, including fear.
Correct.
You were present with fear. And I remember in Gary's book, and if you haven't read it, you have to read it. It's called Bliss, One Hero's Journey, of his remarkable journey of healing from that diagnosis. And even in that journey, you did describe one instance of fear that you had on the airplane.
Yes,
right?
there's a couple of things. Yes.
A couple of things. I don't remember. I remember the airplane. But you handle that by being present with the experience.
Always coming back to presence.
And often when we're in fear, we're either paralyzed by it, we're paralyzed by the fear, or it drives us to some state of urgency. Oh my God, I have a cancer diagnosis. I have to find the solution. I'm so terrified. Right. So instead of either being paralyzed or being driven, you were just present and you felt that experience of fear. And you used what you do in your work, your Alexander technique. To move with that, to move through that, to allow it to move through you. Yes? Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, because for those of you that are familiar or not familiar with Alexander work, some people think it's just a movement technique, which is not entirely true, although it does deal with that. But it's about becoming very aware of one's habits, one's what one does, not only in their physical body, but emotional, mental, psychological bodies, how we're actually relating to this, what we call the world outside of us, and how we are utilizing ourselves in relationship to that world. Which, remember, you have a relationship going on with every single thing you're doing at every single moment. Even if you're by yourself, you still have a relationship with the environment that you're in. And if that relationship is often not in a good place, then that kind of becomes the habit of what is going to occur at future times. In other words, you're constantly creating yourself in your present moment for your future moments. And that can either be a really good thing or a really bad thing, depending upon how you're using your energy. I find that many people, because they are caught in their head, thinking, associated with a lot of fearful thinking, I'm going to be late for work, this is not going to work out, I've got a meeting with somebody I can't stand. In other words, those are projections of future that may or may not be true, but if we live in those states and we constantly keep that habit of worry projection going on, then we will do the same thing in future moments because we will become addicted or habituated to that, and that will lead to an addiction of it.
Yeah, and fear really is a very powerful biological phenomenon, and we could liken it to an addiction because it is so powerful. We're hardwired, actually, to be sensitive to fear stimuli, to be sensitive to anything in our environment that provokes anxiety, because that was necessary evolutionarily to be hardwired that way.
Absolutely.
However, we are hardwired now more often than not, when we don't need to be, because we're not being chased by the saber-toothed tiger or the cave beast, right? Yeah.
Survival is not as much of a difficulty, at least in this.
Unless we're in a burning building.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
So how did you get out of that fear mode when you were in the airplane?
Well, the airplane, the number one thing was to first. Those of you that saw the other part, I got caught off surprise, but was to gain more control over my moment. Like, all right, what's happening? What's going on? I thought my tumor had fractured. I thought I was going to die in the next 10 minutes. And then I really went to the Alexander directions. There's a whole list of directions that one goes through with the body. But then, of course, the breath. That the breath, remember, if you're not breathing, you're in trouble. I mean, it is the first thing a baby does. And then getting back in touch with that. So
you were bearing witness to your experience rather than having it run you.
Correct.
Rather than, oh my God, I got to do something. I got to tell the flight attendant. I might die. Right? So you were stepping back, watching all of this going on as if you were watching the scene of a movie.
Correct.
Yeah. And something that you said when we were talking earlier, and I can't remember exactly the words, but to paraphrase, it was something to the fact the minute I had started to observe it, the fears went away.
Yes.
Something like that. The minute we bear witness to what we're experiencing, we actually shift the experience.
Correct.
And when we're in that state of fear, it may sound completely counterintuitive to actually stop, to pause, and to be with it. But it's by being with it, it's by cultivating the experience of it, that we allow it to shift.
Absolutely.
Yes?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you mentioned breathing. Can you
Yes.
tell me more about the breathing?
That breathing, and we had discussed this earlier, it's a more fuller bodied experience than most people do. Most people breathe very top oriented. Most people that I work with think the lungs are right here behind the rib cage, which is actually not true. They're not directly behind. And they have the concept that the lungs bring air into the body, which they actually don't. The lungs are the receivers of air, oxygen, into the body, but it's really the movement of the diaphragm and the movement of the organs downward in the bottom of the torso that's actually creating the ability for the air to come into the lung. So again, it's a lot of people have a kind of reversed idea of how it is that the lungs breathe, which they don't. They do take the air, but they do not actually do the breathing themselves. They cannot move themselves. They must be moved, and they're moved by the diaphragm and the movement of the other organs.
Should I talk a little
Please.
bit about that?
Yes.
The diaphragm, and you may have heard of diaphragmatic or belly breathing, which is the breathing that enables us to enter a state of what's called parasympathetic nervous system stimulation. And that's a system that's needed for rest, repair, rejuvenation, healing, digestion, feeling good, feeling peace of mind, feeling freedom from fear. The diaphragm is like a sliding or swinging door that actually can move down, can descend. It separates the lungs from the digestive system, from the intestines. And when we allow our belly to expand, I don't know if you can see me on the video here, but I'm putting my hands a little bit below my belly button. When I allow my belly to expand on the inhale, the diaphragm is moving down, and my lungs are getting to expand more fully downward, outward, and backward, because the intestines are getting out of the way when that swinging door, the diaphragm, moves downward. Mm-hmm. And because of that, what I love, this is the sciencey part that I love, is when the lungs expand more fully, they send an instantaneous signal called a baroreceptor, like the barometric pressure. It measures the pressure. They send an instantaneous signal to the brainstem, which is the primal, subconscious, uncontrolled aspect of our brain, to lower all sorts of physiologic parameters, including how fast we're breathing, our blood pressure, our heart rate. It turns on all the feel-good chemicals in the brain. It turns on the chemicals that are required for digestion and relaxation. So that belly breathing, as I need to take an exhale right now, I wasn't breathing in that long spiel. That inhalation, that allowing the belly to fully expand, toggles on that very important nervous system of relaxation, repair, and healing, and rejuvenation, which is part of what you do in Alexander, in addition to being very bodily aware.
As well.
And the very notion of belly breathing allows us to be present in the moment.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So if we can stop to pause to breathe, we can shift that fear. Mm-hmm. Okay? We may need to do that a lot. Sometimes I'm in fear. I'm not always freedom from fear. Mm-hmm. Okay? But if I can step back to bear witness, like you explained, to watch, to stop and see that, wow, I'm in this state of worry, rather than being driven by it and taking action. Mm-hmm. And then I can stop to pause and breathe. Yes. I can actually shift the physiology of my body, of my brain.
Yes.
And that's how the fear can shift. Yes.
And you can then make that the habit. Yes. So that then when crisis hits, when trouble hits, then you have something to fall back on. Quite often, people go to that as the last resort. Right. And by then, it's a little too late.
Right. So we have a tool. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Something else we talked about was meditation. Should we mention that?
Yes. And I did do a tremendous amount of meditation, but I don't do it in a rigid or programmed type of way. I know there's lots of people where it works for them to, do set times or do it this way or sit a certain way or do this. Mm-hmm. Especially during my journey, I didn't do that. There would be times when I would do that, but not always. And I pretty much made all of my therapies meditations. Mm-hmm. When I would have all kinds of electrical stimulus we talked about, or I would be in saunas or in a hyperbaric chamber. Those all became meditations. Mm-hmm. Everything was really a meditation. It was one meditative experience to another, and then even walking became a meditation. Where as much as possible, it wasn't like I had cancer and death looming at me all the time. And when they did kind of loom, I just would kind of get them to loosen up. I would step outside of them. And I could always go back to the fact, well, I'm not dead yet. And it was true. I wasn't. So that was always worked for me.
So for you, meditation was another form or another tool for being present with what was. And just...
Correct.
I like that, and I'm very much aligned with you about no rules, no shoulds for meditation, and that it can be a process, an experience of just being with whatever we're doing, whatever we're doing. If I'm washing the dishes, if I'm walking, and it's a way to cultivate a bearing witness perspective of our thoughts and feelings.
Absolutely.
Yes? And again, it's when we bear witness, we toggle off that fear.
Right.
Because we're watching it. We're no longer in it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And then I think we mentioned this before as well. I was journaling. I was talking about things because there was something that just made that more concretizing for me, to acknowledge that this really happened. I had this experience. And then to rewrite about it and have yet another way of looking at it, and to reassess it, because sometimes, and there were some things that were major that were happening to me, I needed more time to process it. So by writing about it, journalizing, and putting it into a journal was very helpful. It's also turned out, which I didn't know, because I didn't even know I was going to survive, I used all that as the notes to my book, which was another kind of surprise, because there's another thing. I was never intending on writing a book. I never wanted to write a book. I wasn't interested in writing a book. And it was only because of a series of events, of things that occurred upon my return, that actually led me to the writing of the book. Once again, though, I didn't allow my initial response of like, oh, I would never write a book. I would never tell this story. I didn't let that override things as I returned. Right. And I realized that the writing of a book might be something that I should consider, and then did consider and did.
Right. There are two ideas that came to mind to me. First was that something we were talking about earlier as well, is that we read a lot, we hear about this a lot, the importance of being free from fear, being fearless. And I just want to reiterate that it's very, very easy to say.
Oh, yes.
Very easy to say, but we cannot will ourselves out of fear.
No.
We cannot read spiritual wisdom and teach ourselves out of fear.
No.
We cannot power ourselves out of fear.
No.
We actually have to be present with the experience of fear for fear to leave us. Yes?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
And that's a little pet peeve I have a lot with some of this spiritual wisdom that teaches us about the importance of fearlessness, but how do we actually do it?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the presence, absolutely is the first part of that. And just accepting. And so back to the plane incident, I just accepted, okay, this is it. I could be dying right now. So what do I do? What am I going to do? To embrace that and go, all right, what's the best I can do right now in this moment in order to accept and to deal with this particular situation, which is then what calmed me down.
Yeah, and I think that, again, you had this unique because many people don't experience that fearlessness about dying.
Correct.
Fearlessness about dying and illness. And for many people, and there may be people who are watching who are dealing with a health diagnosis and are in fear about that issue and are in fear of dying. And I think that in my profession, we have truly horribilized the idea of being a human being, because we haven't learned as a culture to accept that dying is part of death, that illness may be part of death if we're going to be dying from an illness. So how do we help people who are dealing with that fear about illness or dying? And I'll just answer briefly and then leave it for you to elaborate on, is that the answer is to be present with the fear. It's not the death or the illness. It's the emotion, the vibration of the feeling that is fearing us.
Correct.
So do you want to elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yes, that we create a scenario in our head about whatever concept we're talking about. In this case, maybe the illness or the death, and that is not necessarily true, but we believe it to be true. Just like people have a belief about death, what death is, that maybe they just go to a dark place, or maybe they go up to heaven and they have angels or whatever. They're creating a concept that is neither really true or not, and then they're reacting off of that concept as though it's true, when in fact it may not be valid whatsoever. So part of what I just kept doing for myself is reminding myself that I really didn't know. That I really, truly didn't know. None of us really, truly do know. Although we like to believe that we do. And we'd like to believe that we do know how bad something's going to be, or how good something's going to be, or how whatever something's going to be, which is a fantasy. It's just an imagined fantasy. And that as I kept seeing that I didn't know, and then proving to myself, like after the airplane event, that, that wasn't anything that I thought was going to happen happened in that plane, that it gave me more strength that the next thing that came along, I didn't go down that dark little rabbit hole. I didn't go down that path.
But that was very logical. That was very rational of you, right? You were using reasoning. You're using logic.
In retrospect, after the event.
Right.
After the event.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I just want to offer that we can't rationalize ourselves out of fear. We cannot use logic to get ourselves out of fear. We have to be present, like Gary was in the plane.
Yes.
With the bodily experience of fear.
Yes.
And we can use all sorts of different techniques, and Gary's Alexander technique, which he teaches if you haven't watched the prior videos, amongst other gifts he has. One of them is being an Alexander practitioner and teacher, as well as an opera singer and more. And a great storyteller. And a very funny guy, too. You can actually laugh about cancer.
There you go. Yes.
But, and I just lost my thought there. So what was I saying? Yeah, about being present with the fear. We can't logic ourselves out of it. We can't rationalize ourselves out of it. We are often in our heads so often. And we are so disconnected from our physical bodies. That's why we're talking about the breath and the power of the breath. I just want to also mention one more snippet about meditation. Meditation as well, and for those of you who may not be tuned into that, and I wasn't for many, many years, although I first learned it when I was a teenager, but I didn't stay with it. Meditation, like the breathing, like the belly breathing, has powerful physiologic effects on the brain and the body, and quite instantaneously. And you don't need to be a monk in a cave living a simple life without the worries of our conventional Western lives to experience those benefits. You can just sit and breathe for 1 minute. Just 1 minute. You don't have to do 20 minutes. And you don't need to sit, you can walk. And you don't need to walk, you can lie down. You can just be present with whatever you're doing. Meditation is about being present. About being present and bearing witness. But what I wanted to say was that in terms of the neuroscience of it all, meditation has been shown to affect the relationship between a part of a brain called the amygdala, which is sort of the hothouse for the emotions that we respond to or react to that can cause us to fight or flee or shrink in terror, and the part of the brain that bears witness and can have a separation perspective from those emotions. And it's shown to actually create new pathways in the brain.
There we go.
And it doesn't take years of being a monk in a cave or
to do it.
Or a guru in an ashram. Yeah. You can sit for a minute at your desk and close your eyes and breathe. And I guarantee you, in just a minute, you're going to feel different. And sometimes I take those literally minute breaks from my desk and my screen when I say, I need to stop thinking for a moment.
Yes.
And it completely shifts everything.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And now in my day, I mean, it's just part of my day. I do it constantly on the subway, during a walk. It's just something that has just become a way of life. I don't even really think about it as like I'm going to meditate now.
Yes, you have this ability to be completely present with wherever you are, whatever you're doing, right?
Yes, it's now.
And that's something that this whole experience of cancer brought to you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is why I often tell people that really almost dying of cancer was like the best thing that could happen.
Yeah.
I mean, it really was the best thing that could have happened to me. It just brought me so much. As opposed to took so much away.
Yes.
And, for, some people that I've known that's not the case for them.
Mm-hmm.
But it was indeed the case for me.
And you surrendered to it.
Yes.
You didn't try to fight it.
No,
You allowed yourself to be with everything that came up around it. Any
Correct.
fear that came up around it, any concern that came around it. You were allowing yourself to be with it.
Correct.
And that reminds me of that study we were both talking about earlier of, I believe it were breast cancer patients, and they were put into 2 different groups. One group was told to just fight the disease, just do as best as you can to fight what's going on. And the other group was told to get in touch with the feelings that were coming up, including any fear, terror, worry, grief, whatever was coming up, to get in touch with those feelings. I think mostly through journaling processes.
Okay.
And interestingly enough, but actually not surprising to me, those women who got in touch with the feelings, the difficult feelings, the uncomfortable feelings, but by being present with them, those women had higher blood test markers for immune function and health well-being.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which is just another,
And it doesn't surprise me as well. Yes.
Yeah.
Because again, I was lucky because I was very weak, and there was no fighting I could have done.
Yeah.
I was losing too much weight, too much blood, so there was I went with. So it kind of, even the disease itself kind of helped me to keep embracing, keep staying present. Because I didn't have energy for anything else.
You were forced to surrender to your body.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I've had that experience too. I've had some dis-eases in my life. And in days to come, I may be writing a book about that all too as well. But in many of those cases, I didn't have the wisdom that Gary has. Okay, my body forced me to surrender. My body made me stop to pause.
Yes.
My body just said, okay, you can't try anymore. It's not working, right? You need to have emergency surgery for one thing, or you're having appendicitis, or you got bitten by a dog,
Absolutely.
Anyhow, but yes, the trying, when we try, when we are efforting, when we are fighting, we are creating physiologic stress in the body.
And do remember, it's promoting more fear. So it's actually making you more fearful.
Right.
And the fighting, and it's an exhaustive amount of energy, especially for someone who's already ill to begin with. So, and I was lucky because the weaker I got, I just couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Just couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Didn't want to do it.
So you just let go and you went with it. Something else I want to ask you. We were talking about this earlier as well. Since your book has come out, you have many people who flock to you who are dealing with diagnoses, some of whom are in a lot of fear.
Oh, yes.
Some of whom are in a lot of fear. Do you have a message for those people?
That, again, what we just talked about, I try to get them to have a little more space around whatever it is that's going on, and to really follow their heart, really go with what they feel they need to do. There's been some miraculous things that have occurred with people that did, and went against either the advice of others or medical advice. But again, that's only up to you. It's all up to you because it is happening to you. It is yours. I know some people don't like when I say that it's your creation, but it is, the disease. Even though it may have come from some outside source, it's still manifested within the person. That's not to blame anyone. That's not to blame the person that's ill. That's not to blame anybody. But that having that acceptance of that, and then to continue that acceptance throughout, and then to honor yourself during, are really the most crucial things in this. And of course, the hardest thing is when it is with a child, and I've had people call who are, a parent of a very sick child, which is much harder to deal with and do. But again, to to, yes, you have to work. Yes, you have to struggle sometimes because you're fighting for them and they're too little to do it on their own behalf. But to still honor yourself and what you feel you need to do in relationship to that.
Yeah, I get that, but it's easy for you to do that. It's easy for you to know what your truth is. Mm-hmm. But if I'm in fear, mm-hmm. I can't connect with my truth. Mm-hmm. I can't.
Yep.
I'm in fear. Right?
Right.
So how do I connect with my truth when I'm in fear?
Again, you have to just go to the embrace of what's going on in that moment. Embrace the fear.
Be present.
Be present mm-hmm. with it.
Mm-hmm.
And even if it's, the child, mm-hmm. you have to embrace what it is that's going mm-hmm. on. Mm-hmm. Because within that could lead you to something that will mm-hmm. move mm-hmm. the energy in a different direction.
And that is, this is going to sound maybe like a little bit of spiritual woo-woo, but... this is a phenomenon that I have experienced. I know you have experienced. I know people who have gone through surrendering and letting go have experienced it. When we let go, when we can be present with what is, no matter how scary it is, and often we're afraid to just feel the feelings. Mm-hmm. But when we can let go and be completely present, when we can get out of the way mm-hmm. by being present, the way appears.
Correct.
I think for parents, that's even harder because they're dealing with their stuff around their child.
Correct.
And it's really their stuff around their child that they need to be present with.
Correct.
Rather than trying to find the path to fix their child. Because, like I said, the way appears when we get out of the way.
Correct.
And we get out of the way by being with what is internally mm-hmm. rather than being driven by it.
Yes.
Which is, I know what some people you've shared with me have come to you for. Please, how can I heal this diagnosis? I'm terrified. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the answer is, don't try to heal the diagnosis. Be with what is right now.
That's right.
And then to you will come clarity and solutions.
Yes.
And it may sound counterintuitive to stop rather than to do.
Correct.
But it's really through the being that the clarity and the solutions for the doing come.
Absolutely.
Right? Through the being, not the doing.
And then it comes in a more organic, more pure way. And again, it's not fueled by fear.
Exactly.
So therefore, it's a much kinder way to move.
Yeah.
But again, many different people, they heal in many different ways. Mm-hmm. I would never tell anybody anything really in terms of, unless they're asking advice, but I would never offer any advice that they were not asking for. Mm-hmm. A lot of people get interested in the clinic that I went to, and that's fine. I give them the information, but I make people understand that just because it worked for me there doesn't mean it's going to work for everybody there.
Yeah.
Just like every treatment there is doesn't mean it's going to work for everybody. If it did, everybody would be healed, but that's not the case.
That's an important point. A good take-home message, and I like to also think of it as there are many medicines, mm-hmm. there are many paths home to healing and well-being, and there are no good medicines, there are no bad medicines. There's a medicine that feels right to you.
Correct.
And you get that feel right to you method or medicine or answer by going within and finding that place of presence and peace. Right?
Yep.
And that peace that dissolves the fear comes by slowing down and just being with what is.
Yes.
Yes?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, that being said, mm-hmm. shall we call it a wrap for part 4?
We will. So thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you for watching. I would love to hear feedback since this was our first 4-part video series.
Yes.
And I think we would love to be doing more together.
Absolutely.
On various topics related to health, living, and navigating being human.
And there may be another book coming out soon.
And again, we'd really love to hear feedback and requests for future topics. And if anything didn't feel so resonant to you, we'd like to hear that too. We definitely want to be a place of support and encouragement. So please offer that to us too.
All right.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Ciao, ciao.
All right.